Every one of these 6 deaths starts the same way. Something breaks, gets patched enough to pass, and stays in service. A folded copper strip standing in for a part, a milk crate holding weight it wasn't built for, a bolt where a safety valve used to be. None of these 6 were reckless, just busy. Dramatized composites of real accident types, names changed. Nothing here is instructional. 1. The copper was a scrap of pipe strap, cut to about the size of a playing card, and folded twice. Dale Merrick kept it in the top drawer of his tool cabinet, wrapped in a shop rag. You hang on to a thing like that when it works. He was 58 and had run manual lathes since he was 19. In a small job shop outside Rockford, Illinois. That made him the man everybody else came to with questions. March 2011. A Thursday morning, cold enough that the overhead heaters were still ticking. The place smelled like cutting oil and burnt coffee. He kept a thermos on the window ledge and a school photo of his grandson taped inside the cabinet door. That winter, a second-year apprentice named Cody asked him what the copper was for. Dale told him the truth. The chuck was worn out, and the shim was covering for it until the new one came in. He had been saying that for 9 months. His lathe was built in 1962. On the spindle sat a 4-jaw chuck the size of a dinner plate. Each of those 4 jaws is driven in and out by its own long screw. You crank them one at a time until the part is locked in the middle. The shop had spent decades running the same few diameters. That meant every jaw sat at nearly the same spot on its screw, year after year. On screw number 2, that spot was worn round and shallow. The jaw would still tighten there, but under vibration it could slip back a few thousandths of an inch. Dale had put in for a new chuck twice. Both times the answer came back the same. Make it work until next quarter. So he made it work. He set the folded copper between jaw 2 and the part. The shim took up the gap, so the jaw stopped farther out. On a stretch of screw the shop had almost never used. Fresh thread, full bite. Every morning he leaned into the chuck key, then grabbed the part with both hands and tried to twist it. Solid, every single time. That test is where the trouble hid. A chuck that holds perfectly at a standstill tells you nothing about what it does at speed. When a chuck spins, the jaws are trying to leave too. Each one is a lump of hardened steel weighing about a pound. The pull on it climbs with the square of the speed. Double the revolutions, 4 times the force. At 2,000 revolutions per minute, a 1-pound jaw hauls outward with roughly 300 pounds behind it. Chuck makers print charts on exactly this. Grip goes down as speed goes up. 3 good screws shrug it off. The 4th had a strip of soft copper sitting in the load path. Copper takes a set. Squeeze it hard and it stays squeezed, a little flatter every time. Every morning that shim got clamped again, and every morning it gave back a little more. Not enough to see, not enough to feel through a chuck key. The job that morning was a pump housing blank. 9 pounds of aluminum, 5 inches across, still rough from the saw. Dale set the spindle at 2,000 for the finish pass and fed the carbide tool in. For about 40 seconds it sounded exactly right. A flat hiss and a bright ribbon of chip curling into the pan. Then a beat came in underneath it. A soft thump once per revolution. That was jaw 2 sliding back, letting the blank ride a hair off center. Off center means out of balance. Out of balance means the spinning mass starts hauling itself sideways in a circle, harder every fraction of a second. The coolant stream wandered off the tool. The tailstock rattled in its lock. On the bench behind him, a row of finished parts began walking toward the edge. The machine climbed into a pitch nobody in that shop had heard out of it before. The jaws blurred into a wobble he could see from where he stood. Dale took his hand off the crossfeed and reached for the red stop button. 14 inches. Jaw 2 let go. For one last revolution, the blank stayed trapped by the other 3. That revolution is what threw it, the way a stone leaves a sling. 9 pounds of aluminum crossed 2 feet of open air at close to 40 miles an hour. The flight took about 1/30th of a second. It struck him in the head. His hand never reached the button. The injury was immediately fatal. Blunt force trauma to the head, with no interval of consciousness in between. Cody got to him in under 20 seconds. There was nothing to do but shut the machine off. The shop went quiet in a way none of those men had heard before. The investigator who worked the scene is the reason any of this is understood. He found the copper on the floor under the machine, carried it to the inspection table, and put a micrometer on it. New, that stock measures 25 thousandths of an inch. What was left measured 11. The repair had been failing for 9 months, in steps too small for anyone to catch, and it passed Dale's hand test every morning, right up to the last one. That is the thing worth carrying out of this story. The check you trust the most is usually the one your failure was never going to show up on. A new chuck arrived at the shop 11 days later. The purchase order was dated the morning after he died. 2. Jerry Voss had a line he used on anybody who brought up safety gear. Brakes are for guys who do not know where the bar is. He said it often enough that his neighbors could repeat it back word for word. He was 46. He had been cutting his own firewood since he was 14. By the standard of a man who never did it for a living, he was genuinely good. Fast, economical, no wasted motion. Confidence like that gets earned honestly. That is exactly what makes it dangerous. It comes from hundreds of cuts that went fine, and it tells you nothing about the one that will not. The second Saturday of November, 2016. A blown-down white oak on his own 40 acres outside Sparta, Tennessee. 38 degrees, frost still holding in the shade. The ground soft from 3 days of rain. The air smelled like cut oak and bar oil, with 2-stroke exhaust hanging in it like a blue rag. He had worked that same hillside every fall for 22 years. Nothing on it had ever surprised him. 4 cords were stacked already, and he wanted 6 by Thanksgiving. His wife told him to be up for lunch by noon. There was a birthday dinner over in Cookville that evening, and his brother-in-law was already up at the house. The saw was a mid-90s model he had bought used, and he kept it in good order. Sharp chain, correct tension, clean filter, right fuel mix. One part was missing. Above the top handle there should have been a curved plastic guard. Knock that guard forward with the back of your left hand, and a spring snaps a steel band tight around the clutch drum. The chain stops dead. That guard does a second job too. In a hard kickback, it swings forward on its own from the sudden motion and trips the brake with nobody touching it. Jerry's had cracked off on a branch years earlier, so both ways in were gone. The guard, the band, and the spring run about $30 together, plus an hour at the bench. He never put it back on. In his reading of the world, that brake was a crutch for men who did not know what they were doing. He was bucking the trunk into stove lengths, working down the log from the root ball. Twice that morning, the log shifted under the bar. Both times he reset his feet and kept going. His fingers had been cold long enough that he had stopped feeling the vibration through the handle. Pale sawdust piled up over his bootlaces. The section he reached around 11 had a limb collar buried inside it. Oak that dense and that dry might as well be a fence post driven sideways through the log. He could not see it. Nobody could. He stood downhill of the trunk with his weight on his back foot. Elbows bent, saw held in close to his chest for control. His left thumb rode on top of the handle instead of wrapped underneath it. That is how a lot of practiced men end up holding a saw. Once holding it stops being something you think about. The grip goes lazy. The chain was moving about 45 miles an hour. The nose of the bar went into the knot. A tooth on the top corner bit into wood that would not give and stopped. The chain could not move forward. The engine did not know that and kept making power. All of that energy had to go somewhere. It went into rotation. The saw pivoted around the buried tooth and came up out of the cut in a hard arc. That arc has one destination, and it is the reason every modern saw carries a brake. With his thumb riding on top, there was nothing in his grip to resist the twist. The saw rolled in his hands. The tip cleared the top of the log. His left hand crossed the exact spot where the handguard should have been and closed on empty air. Nothing swung, nothing tripped. The band stayed loose, and the chain never lost a single revolution. The bar came up past his forearms, then past his shoulder. His elbows were bent, so his head was inside the arc instead of behind it. The whole rotation took about 1/10 of a second. Human reaction time. From seeing a thing to starting to move averages closer to 1/4 of a second. He was still hearing the engine change pitch when the bar came across him. The engine bogged, the clutch let go, and the saw dropped into the leaves at idle. The injury involved the major vessels of the neck and was not survivable. He lost consciousness within seconds. There was no window in which he could have called out or helped himself. The house was 400 yards up the hill. It would not have mattered if it had been 40. When he did not come up at noon, his brother-in-law walked down the skid trail after him. By then, the saw had run its tank dry and the hillside was quiet. The county report ran to 2 pages. Under equipment, it carried a single line. Chain brake present, handguard absent, brake non-functional. Everything else on that machine was in good order. He had maintained every part of it except the one part built to save him from himself. Kickback does not test skill. It tests hardware. Once, without warning, and it grades on 1/10 of a second. The brake needed less time than that. The repair needed an hour. He had 20 years of Saturdays to spend that hour in. He spent every one of them cutting. 3. 91 degrees in Muncie, Indiana by 10 in the morning, and Ray Dorsey had the whole Saturday mapped out. Sand first. Primer by noon. Color coat before dark. The boat was a 15-foot aluminum fishing rig that had sat on its trailer 2 years with the paint chalked off it. He had retired from the county road crew that spring, and now he had nothing but time. The garage was detached, out behind the house. He had the overhead door up about 1 foot for air and a box fan running in the corner. It was the 23rd of August, 2014. In the far corner stood an 80-gallon upright compressor with a cast-iron 2-stage pump. He had bought it used sometime in the 90s. It was the most reliable thing he owned. 9 years earlier, it picked up one small habit that annoyed him. On top, next to the gauge, sat a brass fitting with a little ring hanging off it. That was the safety relief valve, and it had started to weep. A thin, steady hiss he could hear from inside the house. He unthreaded it and screwed a steel plug into the hole from his hardware drawer. The hiss stopped. That is the whole beginning of this. A man who fixed a noise. I want to be fair to him here, because this is the trap. He did not think he was pulling out a safety device. He thought he was stopping a leak. To him, they were the same object. A relief valve is not a warning light. It is a hole that opens by itself when the pressure reaches a number the tank cannot argue with. His tank was rated at 175 pounds per square inch. The pump has no opinion about that rating. It keeps stuffing air in until something stops it. 2 things were supposed to stop it: a pressure switch that cuts the motor at the set point, and the relief valve standing behind it in case that switch ever failed. Ray had gone from 2 down to 1. There was a second problem, and it had been growing at the bottom of the tank for 20 years. Squeeze air, and the water in it turns to liquid, so every compressor tank collects a puddle. There is a drain valve underneath for exactly that. 5 seconds after a job, and a cup of rust-colored water runs out on the floor. Ray had opened his maybe twice. Standing water was eating the bottom seam from the side nobody ever looks at. He had shot half the hull when the compressor started running longer than it should have. Worn pressure switches fail in one particular way. The contacts weld themselves together. The motor never receives the order to shut off. Ray was 30 feet away with the spray gun in his hand, hearing a motor that would not cycle. The garage was full of primer haze, and the fan pushed it toward the door in slow sheets. Then came the smell of hot varnish off the windings, sharp and electric, cutting right through the primer. He read it the way almost anyone would. The motor was cooking itself. He would burn it up if he kept going, so he would deal with it after this coat. He set the gun down and started across the floor to pull the plug. Behind him, the needle went past 200 and kept climbing. A 2-stage pump does not quit at the number printed on the sticker. It keeps building until the motor stalls or something lets go. 80 gallons of air squeezed that hard is not stored air. It is stored energy, well over half a stick of dynamite, sitting in the corner of a garage. He got to within about 8 feet of it. Somewhere past 250 pounds per square inch, the steel along the bottom seam ran out. 20 years of standing water had taken that wall down thinner than a credit card. It did not open the way a balloon opens. A crack started at the weld. Once a crack in a pressurized shell starts, it runs faster than the metal around it can share the load. The seam opened all the way around. The bottom of the tank released in about 0.02 of a second. Everything stored inside came out at once as a pressure wave. The tank came off the floor. Fragments of the shell crossed the garage. Ray was 8 feet away and facing it. There was no interval in which he understood what was happening. The medical examiner recorded blunt force injuries and severe blast injury to the lungs. That means pressure trauma to the air spaces inside the chest. Death was instant. The side door of the garage was found in the yard across the street. A woman 2 doors down felt it in her chest before she heard it. Neighbors 3 blocks over came outside thinking a car had hit a house. The first firefighters up the alley were looking for flames and found none. No fuel, no gas line, nothing burning at all. Just a motor still turning, driving a pump with nothing left to fill, until somebody threw the breaker. A relief valve is not optional equipment. It is the last thing standing between a tank and the room around it. And that little drain underneath decides how much tank is left to do the holding. Ray's compressor ran 20 years without a complaint. He took that as proof it was safe. It was only ever proof that the pressure switch still worked. 4. Dana Whitcomb called goodnight down the cellar stairs at 4 minutes past 10 and got nothing back. She had just run the last rack of glassware, and the dish machine was still winding down, loud enough to swallow a room. She did not think twice. She counted her drawer, killed the dining room lights, and set the alarm on her way out the back. It was Sunday, the 9th of February, 2020, at a seafood house in a working port town on the Massachusetts coast. Dead slow, the way that waterfront gets after the holidays. 4 people worked that whole night. The dishwasher got cut at 9:30. The other cook left at 9:45. Nate Ferreira stayed on to prep for Monday because he had asked for the extra hours. He was 24. He was saving for a truck he had already gone and looked at twice. He lived 4 blocks up the hill and walked to work, so there was no car in the lot to make anybody wonder. The walk-ins in that building were not in the kitchen. They sat down a flight of wooden stairs in a cellar prep room off the loading door, the way a lot of old waterfront buildings are laid out. At 9:50, Nate went down there for a case of scallops. The freezer was 8 feet by 10, steel skin over 4 inches of foam, holding at 10 below zero. It smelled like cardboard and cold metal, and the fans in the ceiling corner never stopped. A walk-in door is nothing like a house door. It weighs about 80 pounds. It hangs on cam lift hinges that pull it closed by themselves, and it snaps into a positive latch when it lands. From the inside, there is exactly one way out, a plunger handle in the middle of the door. You push it, a rod pulls the latch back, and you walk out. That handle had snapped off its rod in November. Nobody in that kitchen filed it under safety. They filed it under nuisance. Everybody worked around it the same way. You kick a milk crate into the doorway before you step in, and you kick it back out behind you. 3 months of that, 20 times a day. The work order for the release kit was written twice and never sent. Nate came out with the case against his chest and swung his heel back to clear the crate. He had done it 50 times. This time, the heel caught it wrong and drove the crate into the box instead of out of it. 80 pounds of door came around on its own hinges. The latch closed with a sound like a car door. He set the case down and pushed the plunger. It moved about an inch and stopped, connected to nothing. He hit it with the heel of his hand, then with his shoulder. He got his fingers into the rubber gasket and pulled until they went numb. The light in a walk-in is switched from outside, and somebody had left it on. That was luck of the smallest possible size. He cleared a shelf, worked a steel post loose, and used it as a pry bar against the latch side. The post bent. The door did not. Over his head he could hear Dana walking. He beat on that door with a sheet pan until his arm quit. A wood floor, 4 inches of foam, and a dish machine winding down. She was 15 feet above him and might as well have been in another county. Then the back door closed. The alarm panel chirped twice, and the only sound left was the fans. His phone was in his apron pocket. A walk-in is a steel box in a stone cellar, and it does to a phone signal exactly what you would expect. No bars, not one. The thermometer is only half of what kills a person in a freezer. The other half runs in the ceiling corner and never shuts off. They run all night to move the air so the box stays even. Moving air pulls heat off a body far faster than still air. Nate was in a cotton shirt and an apron, damp with sweat from 6 hours on a hot line. Wet skin, moving air, 10 below zero. His body did the only things it knows. It shut blood flow down to his hands and feet to protect the middle. It shivered hard, which burns fuel fast and cannot be kept up. He stacked crates in the corner and sat up on them, off the concrete. That is the smartest move anybody in that spot can make. He kept moving as long as moving worked. Around 90 degrees of core temperature, thinking gets slow and clumsy. Judgment goes before strength does. The shivering stopped a few hours in, and that is not relief. That is a body with nothing left to shiver with. His heart rate slowed. Cold blood from his arms and legs drifted back toward his center, and cold blood arriving at the heart makes its rhythm unstable. He lost consciousness sometime after 2 in the morning. The rhythm broke up, and then it stopped. The medical examiner recorded cardiac arrest brought on by severe hypothermia. The morning prep cook came in at 6 to start stock and found him 5 minutes later. The release kit that would have opened that door from the inside runs about $70 and takes 20 minutes to fit. If you work around a walk-in, push the inside handle once a week. 2 seconds. It is the only part of that whole box that is there for you and not for the food. Dana Whitcomb had stood at the top of those stairs with her coat over her arm. She called good night, heard the machine, and figured he had already headed home. She has said since that she never once thought about the crate. Nobody in that building had thought about it since November. She still works the waterfront. She does not close alone anymore. 5. Quarry water does not warm up. The top 20 feet will fool you in July. Then you drop through the layer where the warm water sits on the cold, and the temperature falls off a shelf. At Ashcroft Quarry outside Rolla, Missouri, the water below 60 feet holds around 45 degrees all summer. On the 9th of June, 2017, Bill Hanratty was 100 feet down in it and having a good dive. He was 52, 10 years certified, a little over 200 dives, careful about most things. His buddy Pete Nowak was 4 feet off his left shoulder. The problem was a hose. 2 weeks earlier, packing up after a trip, Bill found a soft spot on the low-pressure hose feeding his main regulator, a hairline crack in the rubber, maybe 3/8 of an inch long, right up near the fitting. That hose is the line carrying breathing air from the tank to his mouth. A new one runs about $45. The shop had to order it, and it would not land before the weekend. So on Friday night at his garage bench, Bill mixed 2-part epoxy and built a neat little collar over the crack. He let it cure overnight, hooked up the tank, and pressurized it in the driveway. Held perfectly. He showed his wife. Rubber hose is built to bend. That is the entire point of it. Epoxy cures into something closer to a ceramic tile and does not bend at all. Put a rigid patch on a flexible hose, and you have not fixed the crack. You have moved the strain to the edge of the patch and hidden the crack underneath. Every time he coiled that hose, every time he turned his head, the rubber flexed hard along that line. Cold water makes cured epoxy more brittle, not less. The crack kept growing where nobody could look at it. They went down the buoy line past the old crane boom at 60 feet. Visibility about 30 feet, green going to gray. At 100 feet, the pressure is 4 times what it is at the surface, so every breath pulls 4 times the air out of the tank. His hands were cold inside the gloves. The gauge read a little over 2,000 pounds. Comfortable. 11 minutes in, the patch let go. It did not crack and weep. The edge lifted, the crack underneath ran the rest of the way around, and the hose opened. Air at 140 pounds per square inch above the water around him came out all at once. At that depth, the sound is not a hiss. It is a roar you feel in your chest. A wall of bubbles went up across his mask and took his visibility with it. The regulator in his mouth went soft, then gave him nothing. Bill had a backup regulator, and it was useless. Both of them feed off the same tank, and that tank was emptying through an open hose. A wide-open low-pressure line at 100 feet drains a tank in well under a minute. Pete was 4 feet away and already moving. Clipped to his chest was a second regulator on a long yellow hose, on a full tank, kept there for exactly this. The two of them had run that drill in a pool more times than either could count. Pete got a hand on the harness and pushed the yellow regulator toward Bill's face. Bill knocked it away with his forearm and went up. This part is worth saying plainly, because it is the part people judge. Panic is not a decision. It is older than the part of the brain that makes decisions, and when it takes over, it issues one instruction: go up. He kicked hard for the light. He held what was left in his chest and held it tight, the way any animal does. That was the one thing he could not afford. Air can be squeezed. Water cannot. At 100 feet, the air in his lungs sat packed into about a quarter of the room it would fill at the surface. As he rose, the water pressed on him less, and that packed air started expanding back out. With an open throat, it would simply have flowed out of him. His throat was not open. He was through 60 feet in under 15 seconds. His chest went tight, then full, then like something was pushing outward from the inside. The worst of it was still ahead, because the biggest change is not down deep, it is up top. Between 33 feet and the surface, the pressure on him cut in half, and the air in his chest tried to double. There was nowhere for it to go. It went into the bloodstream instead, and from there it took the short road to his brain. He lost consciousness in the last few feet of water. He came up on his back about 20 feet from the platform. Pete had him out in under 2 minutes. They worked on him on the concrete pad, an ambulance 9 minutes out. The medical examiner recorded lung overexpansion injury with gas in the bloodstream and cardiac arrest. None of it was survivable. The gear was sent out for inspection afterward. The epoxy collar was still hanging off one side of the hose. Underneath it, the crack had grown from 3/8 of an inch to just under 2. The rule is 1 line long. Hoses do not get patched, they get replaced. And here is the detail that stayed with the crew. A blown hose at 100 feet is not a death sentence. Divers live through it constantly because the answer floats 4 feet away and takes 3 seconds. What killed Bill Hanratty was the last 30 feet, the shallow part, the part where he could already see the light. 6. He paid $425 for it at an estate auction outside Roanoke, Virginia, in the spring of 2009. A quarter-sawn oak bookcase, 9 feet tall, 18 inches deep, glass doors across the top half, built around 1910 by somebody who did not believe in shortcuts. Harold Kessler taught high school history for 31 years and had the book collection to prove it. Getting the thing into the front room took 4 men and a lot of language. Coming through the doorway, the front left leg took the whole weight at a bad angle and snapped off at the ankle. Harold did not call a furniture restorer. He went to the hall closet and came back with a stack of magazines. Glossy home and garden issues, the heavy kind with the stiff covers. 22 of them made a stack just under 4 inches, which was exactly the height of the leg he no longer had. He slid it under the corner and set a level on the top shelf. Dead center. He was delighted with himself, and he told people about it. Guests got the story every time. For 3 years, that fix never moved. Not a creak, not a lean, not a wobble when the furnace kicked on. The room smelled like old paper and lemon polish, and he kept the glass wiped. He loaded it the way collectors do, a few volumes at a time. Reference on the bottom, novels through the middle. The good bound, sets up top behind the glass. Loaded. That bookcase weighed close to 700 pounds. Something like 180 of it stood on paper. Paper is very good at one job and useless at another. Stack it and press straight down, and it barely gives. A 4-inch stack of magazines will carry the corner of a bookcase all day without complaint. Push that stack sideways, though, and the pages act like a deck of cards. Glossy paper is coated with clay to make the photographs sharp, and coated paper on coated paper has almost no grip. The bottom magazine sat on a wool rug and was not going anywhere. Everything above it was held by nothing but its own weight. On the afternoon of Friday, the 19th of October, 2012, Harold came home from a library sale with a boxed encyclopedia set. 26 volumes, 90 pounds altogether, $8 for the lot. He was pleased about that too. He wanted them up top behind the glass, where the good sets lived. His wife was at her sister's place in Lynchburg until Sunday. He opened a 2-step folding stool at the front left corner of the case and started lifting volumes up, 4 and 5 at a time. A corner that gives way on its own usually just makes a piece of furniture lean. It settles into the low side and sits. What made this one different was where Harold stood and what his arms were doing. Every book he set on that top shelf raised the center of gravity of the whole assembly. A tall case is a lever. The higher the weight rides, the less it takes to start it moving, and a man on a step stool does not lift straight up. He leans in, then pushes forward and out. Each push put a small sideways load on the case, up at the top, where it counted for the most. The stack under the front left corner took the first of those pushes without a sound. It took the second one too. Somewhere around the 16th volume, the top magazine slid 1/8 of an inch. Nobody would have heard it. The page under it slid on the page below, then the next, and then the whole stack fanned out sideways like a dropped deck of cards. The front left corner dropped just under 4 inches. On a stepladder, that is nothing. On a case only 18 inches deep, it swings the top, 9 feet up, almost 2 feet out into the room, and it went forward and to the left, which is exactly where he was standing. The glass doors rattled once in their frames. The center of gravity crossed the front edge. From that instant, no amount of a man's strength mattered. 700 pounds of oak and paper came down. Harold got a hand up. The step stool went out from under him. The case landed across his chest and pinned him to the floor, and the shelves and books underneath held that weight right where it was. He could not draw a breath. The medical examiner recorded compressive asphyxia, which in plain words means the load across the chest stopped him from breathing at all. He lost consciousness within a couple of minutes. There is no position from which a man moves that much weight off himself. His wife came home Sunday afternoon. The fire crew that lifted the case needed 2 men and a pry bar, a case that tall belongs bolted to the wall studs. Harold's was not anchored to anything, because in 3 years it had never once given anybody a reason to think about it. And here is the detail that stayed with the crew who worked the call. When they got the case upright, it was not damaged, not a cracked panel, not one of the 4 glass panes broken. The bound sets on the top shelf were still standing in order, right where he had pushed them tight against the back. The thing was built to last a century, and it did. The magazines were fanned out across the floor, still glossy, still perfectly readable. Every one of them exactly as strong as the day he slid them under that corner. Only one person in this video had backup for ignoring the warning. The machinist, whose boss said no, twice, and lost the argument anyway. The other 5 made the call alone. Does a manager's no wipe out the blame if the part still ships? Tell me which of these 6 repairs you'd have actually risked. Like and subscribe if this is your kind of channel.